Well, yeah. So maybe explain, or if you, I don't know if that's part of your presentation, but as I said in the introduction, you were actually very specified on the indexing part, and now you take the very bold statement on decentralize everything.
Yep.
Or decentralize everything without a question mark. What was the journey? Like, are you talking about this, or?
We're talking about this. I think the main catalyst is that once you start decentralizing one part of your tech stack, you realize that it's not that hard to do the rest, and the benefits apply across. And for us, at SUBQUERY, we built an indexing infrastructure platform. We built a network to support this. And we noticed that the contracts that we wrote and the structure of the network and the way that we manage payment to proofs of indexing, proofs of work, and dealt with inconsistencies or conflicts, that applied to other things as well, which is why we're kind of progressively building more than just decentralized indexing. Now, there's still the traditional SDK that many of the teams in the space use, but we've realized that things apply outside as well. And I think we're at that maturity point in Web3 right now. If you're building an application, and I'm going to this in the presentation today, that if you're building an application in this space, you do have the option of not using centralized providers. And it's got a lot better in the past 2 years around that. People still take the easy path in this space, and they don't have to.
Very good, very good. And maybe also something to mention, SUBQUERY is specialized or very active within Polkadot, but you offer your services to different ecosystems, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, again, I don't know what you're touching on the presentation. I just asked this question. Where else are you building, and what other ecosystems maybe you see different, what kind of traction?
We started in Polkadot many years ago. Polkadot was our home. It was kind of our genesis. And it's where we began, and that's why our name is SUBQUERY. It's one of interesting, when everyone asks in different ecosystems, where'd you get the name SUBQUERY? There's all these poker something or sub something that all come from the Polkadot ecosystem. We do massive amounts of work in the Polkadot ecosystem still, but we also support over 200 networks across EVM, across Cosmos, across Polkadot, across Algorand, Near, Stellar, and even more. And the thinking behind that is developers are going to build in different chains. And we're seeing a lot of developers these days starting to build multi-chain applications from the start. Either having two networks that they build their applications on, or having their kind of application work across different layer 2s or Polkadot's parachains to provide that unified user experience across these applications. And so for us, the catalyst here is that wherever they're building, we need to support them. And that's why we put a lot of focus in adding the support to other networks and making sure that the developer experience is basically the same. So if you want to move from Polygon, for example, to Polkadot, the developer experience is not that different.
Amazing. With SUBQUERY only.
With SUBQUERY, of course.
With SUBQUERY only.
Of course, Rust is different, but you could use Moonbeam, for example, with the EVM layers. People want to have that familiar applications across different things, wherever they have their assets. And that's a trend that we're helping to power with the way that we build SUBQUERY.
Very good, very good. And I guess most of this data is also public, but can you give an overview of the activity on different networks? Like where you said Polkadot born, Polkadot native, so to say, but do you see maybe more traction for SUBQUERY tech stack in different ecosystems?
We see the cycles go through. We found one interesting thing was there was a big cycle into Cosmos zones about 2 years ago that we watched. And everyone was suddenly building a new Cosmos zone. Like DYDX, for example, launched their Cosmos zone 2 years ago. And the pattern is somewhat cyclical in terms of that. At the moment, layer 2s are having a big resurgence. But it's still the same kind of idea behind it, still the same mentality. So people are building in different places. There's actually, I wouldn't say there's one network that everyone's building on right now. Of course, there are some hype cycles in certain places, and some networks go through some massive growth very quickly, and then fly too close to the sun, and like Icarus burn and don't really do much after. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's one that's taking everything by the storm. There's a lot of developers in lots of different places.
Very good. All right, I think we can start with the official talk.
Yeah.
Do I get the green light from the timekeepers?
Keeping us on schedule.
Who gives me the light for the timekeeping? Are we good?
Yeah.
Perfect. The stage to you, James.
Thanks, sorry. All right. Well, I've got 25 minutes. I'm going to talk to you today about this, decentralizing everything from RPCs to storage. And as we just discussed, Zoe and I, the whole mentality behind this talk is that Polkadot and Web3 in general is now at that point of maturity where you don't have to worry about centralized services anymore. And that is what we're coming through. Now, Polkadot, of course, has led the charge here, right? For a long time, we've talked about Polkadot being unstoppable. It's one of their main kind of marketing. You can see the unstoppable word kind of put in a lot of places. Gab's talked about this a lot. And what does that mean? It kind of means, well, in Polkadot, you have thousands of decentralized validators. You have this innovative open governance strategy. Regardless if it works well or not, it's actually quite groundbreaking. And you don't have that in many other ecosystems. You have an empowered developer community. I don't think there's many networks out there where the developers are so fiercely debating things that may seem so inconsequential to some people. But you find that in Polkadot. And I think that's a good thing. People are very vocal and into it. Of course, shared security. The advantages of parachains is that, unlike Cosmos zones, for example, where every Cosmos zone has to have their own validator set, and that means some Cosmos networks have like 5 validators total. Polkadot benefits from this shared security model. And of course, the upgradability makes a big deal. Another example of Cosmos, hard forks are like the only solution in Cosmos, and it's a pain in the ass to deal with. So this unstoppability aspect is something that Polkadot has really pioneered, and it's very important to the ecosystem. And I think that needs to extend as well to the applications we build on the ecosystem. The network is unstoppable, but I believe that we're not quite there yet. And the benefits of unstoppability, they're quite, we all know what these are, reduced risk of censorship. There's no one body that could take down your network or take down your application. They're more resilient, more reliable. There's a decentralized network of infrastructure running these applications or these networks. And they're not natively scalable. If traffic doubles overnight, the network should elastically deal with that. And the end result here is this: users have higher confidence in your applications and the network itself, and trust in the integrity of that network. But as I said, I think there's an issue here. So Polkadot itself is pretty unstoppable. The network's pretty good. But I do strongly believe that a lot of the applications that we use on Polkadot have a bit of a weakness here, a bit of a, try not to talk about too much. And that's that a lot of applications of Polkadot rely on some centralized services that kind of undermine the fundamental unstoppability of these applications, okay? It's a bad secret, it's a guilty thing that we need to solve, okay? We need to remove these centralized services from everything in application, not just the core parachains, not just the core relay chain. And so that's what we're talking about today. It's about options that you have as a developer to make your product more unstoppable, more decentralized. And when we look at building an application, a common application, well, it doesn't need to be this way, a common application and Polkadot might look like something like this, okay? So you might have, your application might be a front end built with React or something like that, or it might be a mobile application. And then you might interact with various different services. An RPC provider is an example here that you'll query to submit and recall transactions from the relay chain or from the parachain. You might use some offsite compute to manage some other stuff, some more expensive tasks that you wouldn't want to execute on-chain. You might take advantage of oracles, of storage maybe to distribute your application, or storage to save user information that's too large for the chain itself. And you might use a data provider to retrieve aggregated and organized on-chain data to power your app to make a better user experience, okay? So this is what a tech stack might look like for your Polkadot application. And as I discussed, right, interacting through RPC providers, retrieving data using data indexes, distributing and storing static data using storage providers, running services and compute providers, and retrieving real-world data from oracles. These are kind of some key pillars of an application. Soon we might be adding AI agents to this as well. So let's go through each of these 5 sections and look at what we have, what the ecosystem looks like. Now, a reminder, RPC providers, this are the first one, okay, that are critical for blockchain applications as they facilitate the communication of transactions to and from the chain. When you submit a transaction, it very likely goes through an RPC provider. You can't run a node on your mobile phone device. You can with light clients, but you can't really run it on an internet browser. RPCs are still the primary way to interact with Polkadot and with the parachains. And traditionally, these have been hosted on centralized services. They've been highly reliable, highly scalable. Some of these are some of the biggest companies in Web3, but they are a point of vulnerability and a point of censorship on the network. So light clients are one way that we'll be trying to mitigate this, but they're still untested. They're not quite production ready at this stage. So what other options do we have? Well, one thing that's come through recently is this idea of decentralized RPC service solutions. Decentralized RPC solutions differ from the centralized type, where rather than one service provider running all the service in their own managed cloud provider or their own managed hardware, a decentralized RPC solution distributes those requests to a network of node operators. Anyone can run an RPC. It's very easy. The documentation is very clear. But you might want to send your request to an RPC endpoint that then distributes that to many different endpoints. What that means is that one provider doesn't have a full list of all the transactions you've made. They can't look at your history of what you've done. And the likelihood of things going down is a lot lower because there are many redundant RPC nodes that power or that serve those requests. Now, we're very lucky in Polkadot. We've got plenty of excellent RPC providers. We've got Lucky Friday, RockX, Alchemy is even here, one of the biggest teams in the world. QuickNode, excellent team. Dwellia, they're fantastic guys. And on Finality, these are all centralized, though. And one thing you might want to consider is by looking at teams like IBP, who are a decentralized network of RPC runners that are banded together to provide a more decentralized version for RPCs. And these already exist in Polkadot.js, for example. Now, at SUBQUERY, we've also built this. We've built a decentralized RPC service. Anyone can join our network and can run a Polkadot or Kusama RPC node. It works with both WebSockets and HTTP requests, which is quite tricky. But your request is distributed to a decentralized network of anyone that can sign up to run these RPC endpoints. So these are some options you have when building your next application of using a more decentralized RPC provider. Let's talk about data indexing, okay? For decentralized applications to function effectively, they need efficient access to data. Now, data here, you might read transactions off the chain for an RPC, but if you want to show a list of, let's say, in a wallet, your last 10 transactions that you've made, you can't get that directly from an RPC. RPCs are quite inefficient, they're very heavy, and they don't give you flexibility in terms of the requests that you make. Data indexes provide cleaner, more organized data directly to your application. And the end result of this is a more intuitive application, a better user experience, and one that's faster and more responsive. Something that us users really need and we expect from Web 2 and we expect from Web 3. And it's something that we kind of expect more and more. So there's only one data indexer. We're very happy at SUBQUERY. We're the only data indexer that is decentralized in Polkadot. We're completely decentralized from end to end. Some of these other providers like Covalent and SUBQUERY are progressively decentralizing. But with SUBQUERY, you can run your data indexer on a decentralized node network. You can put it out there, and any node operator can run it, and it can serve data back to your application. Okay? We're very happy to have this in place right now. Let's talk about storage providers. Okay? Storage is used to keep static information that is too large or costly to be saved to the blockchain network. So let's say your application is storing like music or media for your application. Or for example, you're distributing the JS bundle of your front end to your users. Now, you can use these centralized providers, but there are decentralized options. And that's a critical component of storing information, because storing information on the chain is very unwieldy. It doesn't quite work well. It's very costly. It's not performant. you don't really want to store anything large on a parachain or a relay chain. So what kind of options do we have here? Well, of course, a centralized approach might be to save your stuff to an S3 bucket in AWS or a storage account in GCP, or to use something like Cloudflare. But we now have plenty of decentralized providers, and many of them in Polkadot. Crust is one of the big networks here in Polkadot that provide decentralized storage. They're an excellent team. They layer on top of IPFS. We use them ourselves to distribute our code bases and applications, and they're very easy to use. Everyone's probably heard of IPFS before. They're not a layer down. Arweave is another great example. And Filebase is already there as well. It's even easy, like in Polkadot.js as well, you can save data to any of these providers through the UI there. They even make it easy that way. So next time you're thinking about storing information or distributing the JS bundle for your front-end web application, consider storing it on IPFS using one of these providers for that decentralization approach to the way that you store and serve static data. All right. Next one, compute. Compute is always important, right? Essential for running complex applications, operations, and computations, right? Smart contracts are great, but they're limited in terms of the compute that you can access. They're limited in terms of the time you can run that compute for. It's not really a great idea to run complex operations on a smart contract. So you probably want to quickly offload that processing of some small and atomic tasks to a smart contract. Now, an easy way to do this in the Web 2 way is like run some kind of AWS account with a couple of lambdas or something and do all that offline in a centralized service. That's the easy way. That's the Web 2 way. It's very simple. Everyone does that. It's really lazy, okay? There's options here now not to use those providers and use a decentralized alternative. So if you're building a gaming application, if you're building like AI training applications, if you're doing inference, if you're doing any kind of processing of long-running data, I strongly suggest that you look for our decentralized alternatives. They're cost-efficient now, they're private, and they also often come with support for trusted execution environments. So you can be very sure that the data and the compute that you require is performed in a secure and privacy-friendly way. Now, there are many of these in Polkadot. Polkadot's actually really well served by this. And the two main ones, of course, is Fala, which you've heard, and Accurust are two major decentralized compute providers for Polkadot. Origin Trail is also providing a bit more of a knowledge-based graph compute environment. And BitTensor as well has come onto the scene with AI tools for training and inference. And that's based on the Polkadot SDK as well. So instead, next time of running a Lambda on AWS or using Google Cloud Platform, consider using something like Fala or Accurust to run that compute and to run in a more decentralized way. It could be cheaper, it could be more efficient, it could be more resilient, and of course, it's decentralized. All right, real-world data from oracles. Oracles are the bridge between the real world and Polkadot. The bridge between the real world and your applications, whether it's financial data, weather data, or anything else that you need from the real world. Oracles are the way to get it onto chain and into your contracts. They fetch data from the outside world, and they submit it into the blockchain. Luckily, though, oracles from the start have been generally decentralized. They have often been built this way, and we're very lucky that this happened. Most oracles in the space these days are, by their nature, decentralized. They don't rely on a single source of truth. They have a lot of logic involved to avoid issues where you might get someone providing malicious information to your contracts. They're already very well progressed on this path. So there is actually zero. I don't think there's any centralized oracles that are kind of out there. But if you want to build on an oracle in this space, consider Accurust and DIA. There are two major decentralized oracles in the Polkadot community. Of course, everyone's heard of Chainlink and Band. They're also working on some of the EVM chains in Polkadot. So you have no excuse for not using any of these oracles out there. And it's a great way to get started. So just to summarize, next time that you go to build an application on Polkadot or any of the parachains, or even on any other EVM chain out there or any other network, consider decentralized It might look like this. We're using SUBQUERY for the RPCs and data indexer, Fala for the compute, Accurast for the oracles, Crust for the storage. Or it could look like something like this. We're using the IBP program for the RPC network, using Accurast for the compute instead of Fala, using DIA for your oracles, and you're using Firebase for your storage. There's plenty of options that you can use. But nowadays, there is no excuse for not using decentralized providers. It's there. And we live in a world now where you can viably create scalable, reliable, high-performant applications on Polkadot and on all the parachains that use completely decentralized providers that are censorship resistant and that are completely unstoppable, which is what that dream of Polkadot has always been about. Anyway, that's it. Stay in touch. There's my Telegram. And I think we're all done. Early again. Yeah.
Thank you. Woo, big applause. Very cool. We do have some time for questions.
Yeah, sure.
Otherwise, we have to do this panel discussion again.
Yeah.
Guys, questions from the builders. How to build on SUBQUERY. OK, that means everything was clear. Maybe one question. I couldn't follow the whole presentation. I had to run out for a minute. But how would be the user experience for builders starting on Polkadot to use SUBQUERY?
Well, I think the whole point of the presentation is really to show that the user experience now can be the same, right?
Yeah.
Like the tooling that we have available in the Polkadot ecosystem across all these different things, whether it's compute or storage or oracles or indexing or RPCs, is at the point now where you don't have to use a centralized alternative. It's there. The documentation's fantastic. There's plenty of use case examples. And really, if you're starting to build, don't do the lazy path. Don't do the standard path. Like, make a point from the start to use these other providers and to truly build an unstoppable application. That's kind of the summary.
Perfect. And maybe because AI is such a big topic, I think we see some presentations about it tomorrow. Big fan also what we are building on Fala in the AI space. You can run decentralized AI inference on SUBQUERY, right?
Not yet, but it might be coming soon. But yeah, you can use, for example, Fala to run AI inference. And Fala, been any kind of compute platform. I mentioned back here that
I saw that.
That
Perfect.
BitTensor, Fala, Accurast, we're all focusing on AI inference, right? And AI training. And so this is like example of where you don't have to worry about using AWS. There's also a bunch of networks that are specialized in just providing high demand, high volume AI training. So they provide access to the latest NVIDIA chips for real big kind of scale training models that might take hours, if not weeks, to train. And they're built in a completely decentralized way. So you don't have to give your training sets to the big cloud providers. You can do it in a decentralized way. You can farm it out to millions of NVIDIA devices or billions of phones out there, in Accurast's case, where they're focusing on the mobile device as powering these networks. But the future is here. The future is now.
Let's decentralize everything.
Let's decentralize everything.
Thank you so much again, James. I guess you will be around today if there are some more questions for one-on-one discussion.